I'm Kent Mayor Dana Ralph, and I'm joined today by Chief Ralph Padilla, and we're here to bring you the third video in our series around 2021 legislative updates. There were quite a few bills this year out of session that addressed police reform directly, and we wanted to take some time to explain to the community the impacts of those changes and what you will see as our department is responding, or in some cases not responding, and how we're taking everything that has been changed and putting it into practice here in the city of Kent. So thanks for joining me today, Chief.
Pleasure, Mayor.
Should we just jump into questions?
Sure.
Okay. Before we discuss any of the specific bills that we've got going on today, can you remind us of when these new laws, when the changes go into effect, and what's your approach in managing these changes?
Yes, so most of the new bills will take effect on July 25th of this year. Some were enacted immediately, and some have provisions in the law that won't be enacted till future years, 22 and 23. But for the most part, what we're talking about is this July. So our approach to that has been to get together right away with our legal advisors and meet with both the law enforcement executives in South King, through the Valley Chiefs and King County Chiefs Association, but also to meet with the chiefs and sheriffs statewide, so that we're looking at this collectively with the hopes that everyone can get around the changes and have some uniformity to how we approach this, right? We want to have some assurances to the community that how Auburn is doing is similar to how Kent is doing. It is similar to how other jurisdictions. So they're consistent, which builds more trust and security. So we met. We are waiting for our legal advisors to finalize some language for policy and changes to law. We've already started developing curriculum for our officers and training, and so we will be ready well in advance of July 25th to implement the new laws.
I am very grateful for that proactive approach to these changes, making sure that we are in full compliance with the new state laws that have been enacted. That's really important, as well as that regional and statewide collaboration. I can tell you some of these conversations that we're having have also been conversations with the South County mayors and mayors across King County in the state as well, because we want to make sure we're meeting the spirit and intent of the legislation that was passed this year. All right, let's jump into a really big one. So this is one that we call the Blake decision, Senate Bill 5876, and it changes laws around drug possession and usage. And this is something that may be fairly visible to our community as we change the way we interact with community members that may be having substance abuse issues or drug use. So could you kind of walk us through what this looks like?
Sure, absolutely. So we call it the Blake decision because it's based on the Cape precedent from the Washington State Supreme Court that occurred a few months ago, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the state's possession law for narcotics was unconstitutional based on the language and a standard of knowing that you're in possession versus simply possessing it. I won't go into details about the case, but it did basically nullify for a time our ability to make arrests for possession of narcotics. So since that time, we've had legislation enacted through, as you said, Senate Bill 5876. And what it does is it moved possession of drugs of most all kinds, prohibited drugs, controlled substances, and whatnot, from a felony level crime to a misdemeanor. And so we can talk more about what that means, but that's the first thing it did. It also put provisions in there that required that law enforcement do deferrals. So if I contact a member of our community today, I determine through an investigation they're in possession of, say, cocaine. And what I have to do for the first offense and the second offense, is required by law, is refer them to services. And until we have done that twice and satisfied that portion of the law, we are prohibited from making a physical arrest. So, and I think that's an important point that when we get into the impacts, I want to make sure we cover. It also requires we look at some of our procedures and policies regarding referrals, and there are some challenges. It prohibits us booking them in jail on the first or second offense. So we've had to work to figure out how do we implement systems that ensure we are tracking those things, right? The law does appropriate $88 million for substance use disorder prevention, which I think is a good thing. I think that's a good start. I'd like to see a lot more money there. And it does have a provision that's important to note, that if there isn't absent changes made by July 1st of 2023, the law reverts back to the case ruling, which again will be back in the boat, where we don't have a provision for possession of drugs that's a crime in the state. So the state legislature will have to take some action there to close that loop.
Okay. So if they don't, essentially what will happen in 2023 is those substances will become legalized.
Yes, that could happen.
Okay. So you touched on it a little bit, but there's some impacts that are coming to both the community and honestly the city and our budget as well. So can you talk through some of those community impacts for us?
Certainly. So I think it's important to note that clearly the legislators were signaling that they didn't want incarceration for possession of narcotics or substances, illegal substances, which I think in an ideal sense, and that's what we all want, right? We don't want to see people in jail that are dealing with substance abuse issues. And so clearly they made a push to where that became more restrictive to do, and they wanted to push and try to enhance our ability to provide services. Again, I think something we can all get on board, right? So if that happens, that's a great thing. But the reality is that overwhelmingly so, most addicts will not take services voluntarily, right? And it's part of the disease of being addicted is that part of it is a resistance to change, right? And so it takes several attempts, and a lot of times it takes a major shift in something that happens in their lives before they'll take it. So time will tell whether or not we have a lot of voluntary acceptance of services. I'm hoping that we will, and we're going to do everything we can, but history tells us that's going to be an uphill battle. The other thing is, this creates a really big unfunded mandate. We do not have systems in place to track. There isn't any clearly identified agencies as to who we're supposed to refer them to. So what we're going to do is take the list of agencies and service providers that we have networked with, that work with the courts and whatnot, and we're going to offer referrals to those agencies, right? The prosecutors have work to do in this, in addition to the officers. It impacts our ability, records keeping, right? We now have to be crystal clear on, did they get 2 deferrals before we make a physical arrest, right? So we will work through all of that, but there is that. There's no funding for the new staff requirements, like I mentioned, and right now it is unclear what happens if a person who's contacted for possession of drugs goes and starts a program but doesn't complete it, and how do we know that, how we're tracking it? So there's a lot of unanswered questions. Again, we're working through it. We've already developed the training. We will have a new direction, a temporary order that restricts taking someone in custody currently in our city for drug possession. We will have a more firmed up policy, and training begins next week on the new procedures.
Okay. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this change and a lot of expense. So making sure that we've got across the region the resources available for treatment when folks are being referred to it, the department tracking it so that when an officer comes in contact with someone, they know if this is the first contact, second contact, or the third contact. From the municipal court side, these are cases that were previously heard at the county level. And so we have 2 municipal court judges here in Kent, and this is has the potential of increasing that caseload, public defender's caseload, and our city prosecutors as well.
Right.
So a lot of moving pieces. Definitely want to work towards the intent of this law, but it's going to be a learning curve.
And you hit on a great point that I didn't cover. These cases in court cost thousands of dollars to adjudicate, and so that's now on the city of Kent to cover. Basically. Another point I was remiss in not sharing is that I want to make sure we're setting expectations for the community. So currently, if you call for someone who you think is possibly involved in drug transactions, right? We see it on TV, we see it in real life. That generally is an opportunity for an officer to go and detain them and investigate, right? That's going to be somewhat different right now because we are not allowed to take someone into physical custody. What I want our community to understand is there will be times where the officer will make contact, will investigate, will seize any illegal narcotics we have, but then we are I'm going to have to let that person go if they fall within that 1 or second referral period. And so I can see some frustration coming from the community when they expect us to make an arrest. But be patient. We'll work through it, and we're going to do everything we can to keep everybody safe.
Okay. I know that I have spoken with parents who had children that had substance abuse issues, or folks that are in recovery, and it sometimes takes multiple approaches to get people into treatment. So the end goal, I am very supportive of this, of getting people into treatment and helping them move forward in their lives. I am personally concerned that we're taking maybe one of those tools away in that piece. So it will be really important for us to be able to monitor that first and second referral, and then if we ultimately end up in a position where criminal justice system needs to be engaged, in some cases that is the persuasion piece, or the thing that helps people move into treatment. So absolutely,
in 30 years of doing this job, the majority of the people that I meet who have overcome their addictions have overcome them a lot of times because of intervention with law enforcement. That was the thing that put them over the top, that said, I need to change my life and I need to do something, and I'm gonna do something about it. So I agree. That's not gone. It's just going to take us a little longer.
And we hopefully have a new interest in Washington State in funding treatment, which is a very good thing.
Agreed.
Thank you, Chief, for that explanation of some of those new changes that are coming to us starting in July. Really grateful for your approach, again, being proactive in how we address these laws and make sure that Kent is within compliance, and at the same time very much committed to keeping our community safe and all of our residents safe. So thank you.
My pleasure.